Welcome to In Time. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. We read all of your comments, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share. Hello. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter, and this is In Time. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I bemoan being called an atheist channel all the time. We do so much content. It's news, politics, religion, but we do on occasion do the atheist show. Why? It's a topic that interests me. I also think there's a lot of tension in that area, especially between atheists, anti-theists, and people who are religious. We have on conversion stories even. We had the conversion story of Dr. Cy Gart, who told us why, when he looked into science, what he saw was God coming out. But obviously, the show leans very strongly in one direction, as do most of the people on it. But we always want to try to find ways to make the conversation better and to make the understanding of both sides better. But today, we've had the deconversion of Aaron Ra, Matt Dillahunty, and a few others to boot, and they've all been spectacular. And we want to try to sort of humanize these experiences. So today we are going to be doing atheist content, and we're going to be having on Seth Andrews to talk about his deconversion and how that affected him and how maybe we can see that in a larger context. Any thoughts on that, Isandering? Welcome, by the way. I've introduced you.
Well, everybody should know that I'm here already. They don't see me, but I'm always lurking. It's people talk about, oh, you're doing too much atheist content. It's like, yeah, but it's still kind of relevant too, because, people's beliefs inform their actions, inform the policies that they like to see enacted, who they vote for, etc. So it is relevant in our world today to kind of get behind why people believe what they believe and, what kinds of things change their minds. So I think it's a great idea to be able to look at a story, because I don't just see it as like an atheist deconversion story. I see it as somebody getting new information and being able to change their mind. And I think that's an important thing for people when we get new information, updated information, that we have the ability to change our mind. So I like highlighting when these kinds of things happen. And I think it's really relevant beyond just the whole, religious debate.
That's a really excellent point. I know I kept you around for a reason, aside from, the fact that you're always wrong on the gun debate, and it's awesome to highlight that, but we'll save that for another time. All right. So, excellent point. And with that said, let's bring out our guest tonight, Mr. Seth Andrews. Mr. Andrews, how are you doing today, good sir?
I'm well. Thanks for letting me play along. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's good to see you. We had you on before to discuss how to make the conversation better. And I think that was a great conversation. I think we're going to be seeing you at Tang's Better Conference coming up at the end of the month. Could you tell us a little bit about your podcast and what it is you do?
Well, coming out of hardcore evangelical Christianity, I came out of a faith culture. And when I deconverted, I wanted to create some online community and be a part of the discussion. And so I launched a website called The Thinking Atheist. I am not the thinking atheist. The thinking atheist is an idea. It is an idea to reject faith culture and to, let's go out and be curious and engage our brains and think about these things. The website started in 2009. I had started a radio podcast in 2010, which was a good fit for me. I spent 14 years in FM radio back in the 90s and 2000s, and I've been kicking ever since, spoken all around the world, published 5 books, and now I'm sitting here with you fine people and glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I will say this too. Neil604 is a good friend of mine, and he's a good friend of the show. He's Canadian, and so we naturally blame him for everything that goes wrong, even if he's not online. If we have production problems, it's his fault. But that aside, I remember he and I hung around together a lot at the last Faithless Forum, and you had been there, and you and I had spoken briefly. I spoke with a lot of people there. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things I had said was, well, I really want to talk to Seth about getting him on the show. And Neil was like, oh, just go up and ask him. I was like, I can't go up and just ask. He goes, no, he's really that kind of guy. He's that kind of guy. And I hear that all the time. And 9 times out of 10, it's complete BS. It's like, Nick, he's that kind of, and if Neil calls you that kind of guy, you're that kind of guy. And I did, and you were like, when do I come on? So we appreciate that, and I think that's, I hope we end up, getting 300,000 subs and end up reflecting that as well. But you've been a gentleman, and we certainly loved the last time. So thank you so much for coming. So with that said, let's talk about, now you had said, a lot of people love your work. A lot of people have seen you. They know who you are, especially in the atheist and anti-theist community, but you didn't start out that way. So what kind of theist were you?
My mother and father were hardcore theologian level evangelical Bible literalist Christians. They met at Oral Roberts University. That tells you how hardcore they were. My mother was a Greek New Testament teacher and remained so today in her mid-80s. And so it was it was our normal. You go to Christian church and we listen to Christian music and we memorize the Christian Bible, and it was one of those. I don't know. I didn't realize how fundy it was at the time, because when you're a kid, you don't have perspective. This is normal. Everybody does this, and if they don't, well, they are evil, or something. Mm. Or those poor deceived people, they weren't fortunate enough to be born in the right place, the right family with the right religion, And, I was, the confidence of youth I had, it's one of those things where when they train you that you've got the answer with a capital A, it has this byproduct of killing curiosity. You stop asking questions about everything, almost everything of substance. I was, a young earth creationist, or at least a biblical creationist, a Genesis creationist, and we just laughed at evolution. No idea what it is, never studied it. We just studied the caricature of it and sort of brushed it off. When it came to things like, other religions or LGBT people, etc., Democrats, we were hardcore Christian nationalist Republicans. Our God was a Republican God, and I was just superior in that. Well, of course, we're superior. And they're weak and they're traitors and probably in league with Lucifer, when you raised around those sort of binary ideas. And on top of that, I was kind of I was a natural communicator, natural leader. I guess I've always been kind of a crusader in my life. So it wasn't long before in high school I was a student leader. I was on stage leading chapel services. I was a spokesperson for Youth for Christ and Christian school from 7 years, I think, 7 or 8. And then I entered a career of Christian music. We played Amy Grant, Stephen Curtis Chapman, Michael W. Smith, that kind of thing. And so even more, I was reinforced in my notions that I was ministering. I was doing God's good work, And I was deeply immersed in that culture for decades of my life before I finally started to tap on the glass. So, my history is a deeply religious, a deeply Christian, a deeply fundamental Christian history.
Well, now you asked about,
please.
You talked about beginning. It's like, you started off in, I believe you called it a faith community. Can you maybe explain exactly what you mean? What are the hallmarks of a faith-based community? of, how can people kind of recognize if they don't really know anything about it? How would you recognize that you're in one of those? Because I think it's kind of important to understand, where you really start from, what the mindset is, to figure out how you got to where you are today.
There are a lot of gears in this machine, and it's a little bit hypocritical, this culture. But the Bible talks about doubt as being weakness or a sin or an attack of the evil one. Remember what Christ said, right? The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed about by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Remember doubting Thomas. Thomas wanted to see the nail holes and the spear hole in Christ's body after the resurrection. And he wanted to make sure it was Christ. And Jesus said, blessed are those who've seen and believed. Blessed are those who have not seen. And so what we have is a culture that takes a lot of pride in embracing faith, which is believing without knowing, really. Because once it becomes knowledge, you no longer need faith. It's called faith because it's not knowledge. But, hey, I believe. The Bible called us to believe, right? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe, it's very much a culture where knowing without knowing in your heart without the data, which is not real knowledge, this type of thing is extolled and it's celebrated and it's taught. And it's, it's a culture where we distrust every non-confirming piece of information. We distrust everything different, and we simply have faith. And that faith becomes our knowledge. It's true because it is. It's true because I believe it. I believe it because it's true. And yeah, you'll see some apologists who talk out of both sides of their mouths and say, well, actually, the evidence is everywhere. God is evident in everything from the rainbow and the beautiful trees and the lovely child born in the delivery room. And, a miracle happened and, intelligent design. Look at the cosmos, et cetera, et cetera. So they talk about how, well, we do have knowledge. God has been manifested everywhere. And then in the other side of their mouth, they say, well, God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. The Lord works in mysterious ways, and he does so that our faith centers must be engaged. So the more sense he makes, the less faith is required. So he needs to be out of our reach so that we will trust him blindly. And you see these sort of two sides of the coin flipping back and forth. But that's what I mean by faith culture, a belief in belief culture.
How much of that do you think? I'm going to jump ahead, but just because it's I do want to get back to this, but I since we're here, how much of the I remember Hitchens talking about Mother Teresa, and I remember I was always a big fan of Daniel Dennett, one of the Four Horsemen that's sort of the least talked about, but he's got the Clergy Project and tries to help people who are in a very serious position. They realize they don't believe anymore, but they happen to be clergy. Their life depends on, or their livelihood depends on it. But one of the things I thought about was in the canonization of Mother Teresa, it seemed to me that if you truly believed that she was a saint, you must know for a fact that you will see the miracles that must be performed post-mortem by her. You're going to see them. You've been told by the Pope you're going to see them. So you need to wait for them and wait for the good ones. But the first one that they used in the canonization was so obviously a fraud. And it got accepted by all of these bishops, and it got accepted by, and I was sitting there going, okay, if I believed, I would find this so profoundly offensive because the real one's coming. The real one's coming. You've been told it's coming. So why accept the fraud? And that's when it struck me as this revelation, and Dennett had used these numbers before, that maybe as many as 40% of the upper echelons of many of these religions actually don't believe. 40% of bishops actually don't believe. Does that make any sense to you, that number? Does that seem high, low? And or then the follow-up question, these things that you've talked about, these platitudes, that do you think how much of that is deliberate, how much of that is engineered, do you think? And when did you start asking yourself these questions?
I can't speak to the statistics in the Catholic Church, nor can I really read the minds and hearts of people professing a belief, but knowing the power of religious institutions to exert control, and knowing that these systems are attractive to opportunists, I do deeply suspect that a great many people who are wearing the bishop's robes aren't all that convinced, if not outright believers, but I can't really read their minds. But Mother Teresa is a great example of belief in belief. I did a speech a few years ago called The Mother of Bad Ideas, where I drew attention to the fact that when you talk to people about Mother Teresa, you get a great sort of case study in how someone can believe deeply and take a belief very personally, even passionately, even contentiously, without knowing anything about it. So you go to someone and you say, look, there's a lot of evidence that Mother Teresa wasn't really saintly. She was responsible for a tremendous amount of suffering. She was a very troubled woman, had some very bad ideas, and she was a total hypocrite, jet-setting around with all these, with the junk bond guy and with the Duvalier family, taking money from them, and a hugely corrupt family. And I say this stuff, and you can see they freeze, and they tighten up, and they clench, and they say, no, you can't. Why would you ever go against Mother Teresa? Why would you ever say anything? What sort of a terrible person could ever criticize? And so then I continue the experiment, and I say, all right, fine. I would like for you to name 3 things that you know about Mother Teresa that have nothing to do with her religion or where she was born, right? More than just Teresa of Calcutta, more than Teresa the nun or the Catholic nun. Give me 3 pieces of information you know about her. Nobody. They can't tell me specific things that she has done, in what places she has done them, has no idea what her life and legacy truly are. So where does this very personal attitude of defense come about somebody that they know nothing about? They fell in love with the idea of Mother Teresa, and they protect that idea like they would protect a member of their own family. People do this with political beliefs, and they certainly do it with religious beliefs. So if I believe based on faith, and I say the Bible is true, I don't really know the Bible, but I know it's true, and somebody comes and they do the counter-apologetics thing, and they say, well, actually, this is wrong, and this has been disproven, and this is contradictory, and this is offensive. Sometimes we wonder, why? Why am I not able to make a dent? Why are they doubling down? Why is the backfire effect kicking in? Why do I leave these conversations pounding my head against the wall? And the reason is that they have a belief in belief, right? This is an emotional connection to a cherished idea, not rooted in facts. And this demonstrates one of the main challenges that we have when it comes to changing minds, even our own. We can all be creatures married to an idea that we take personally. The amygdala fires up, our defenses kick in, we stop listening, and nobody gets anywhere. So that's just, forgive the digression, but the Mother Teresa example reminded me of belief in that regard.
What was it? So you grew up in faith community. You were in this very deeply. You believed very deeply. Where did the cracks start beginning? What was it that made you at least contemplate the idea that maybe I'm wrong, or maybe all of these people around me are wrong, and maybe I should do a little bit more research?
Well, everybody deconverts differently. I took a long time. I think one thing about working in Christian music, and then later I was a video producer for literally hundreds of churches all around the country. When you see so much of the hypocrisy, and you see so much of the human struggle, and you see so much of the marketing in this culture, I think, there's a series of red flags that I think started to come up. My first major hiccup happened in 97. There was a Christian music artist and songwriter named Rich Mullins. He was terribly killed in a car accident. This was September of 97. And I was charged to go online and, make the announcement. And we gave words of comfort. He's in a better place. He's in a place now where there are no car accidents, and we will all be reunited in kumbaya, blah, blah, blah. And, it was really in that moment I thought, this makes no sense. Why would God bring this guy to the forefront of ministry? Why would he then have him hit his body, not his car, his body hit by a semi on a dark highway in Albuquerque, New Mexico somewhere? Why would he give his mother a closed casket and send the planet into mourning, all of his fans? This makes no sense. And then I also became very aware that we were constructing the mechanisms for comfort, right? We were painting in the lines. We were writing the happy ending. Well, he's gone, but it was just a temporary moment of suffering. And he is now in a place where there is only light and joy and music and goodness and God. And one day we'll all get to experience this together. And it just felt manufactured, 9/11 was a big thing for me. I was on the air at Live 101.5 FM, a Clear Channel property. I was the known Christian at a secular company, and everybody freaked out during 9/11, including myself. People came to my studio because they were scared, and they wanted me to pray for them because I'm the Christian. We all sat around, joined hands, and I came up with some sort of lofty language, dear Lord, protect us, blah, blah, blah. The whole time I just felt like it was wrong. Like something, these things aren't making sense. Why am I praying to the same God who knew this was going to happen and did nothing? Why are even the Muslims screaming the name of God and saying that they're on God's side and God is on theirs? And what about all these weird threats from people like Pat Robertson and Falwell who say we deserved it because of the gays or whatever? I mean, it caused me to go dormant, really. I was wearing Christianity on my lapel. Yeah, of course, I'm a Christian. Of course, I believe in God. But I lived pretty much a secular life. I didn't go to church, didn't care about the Bible. And, I just sort of checked out. And so it was probably 2 major events and about 1,000 small ones that led me to finally get serious about, trying to figure things out. But that didn't happen till I was 37 years old.
Sam Harris had said about how belief feels so uncommonly good. And you had talked about the there's no feeling like the confidence of youth. So here you are starting to doubt. You're a leader in this community. Why pull on the threads on the tapestry? But why challenge it? Why ask any more questions if it gave you status and gave you a place of belonging?
That's a great question. I think some of it has to do with getting older and being less interested in keeping everybody else comfortable, right? Because there are social pressures that keep a lot of people from really taking a journey, especially an uncomfortable one. I don't want to freak out my family, or I don't want my spouse to leave me, or my children to disown me, or vice versa, or whatever. And there was a speech I had stumbled across, a Christopher Hitchens debate with a rabbi. And I didn't know much about Hitch, but I had heard his voice a few times, and I was just listening to stuff while I was working on a video editing project. I'm doing graphics. I've got Photoshop and After Effects stuff, but I'm doing keyframing stuff that doesn't require a lot of creative thought. So I just listen to stuff, and I put on YouTube videos and that kind of thing. And, I remember listening to Hitchens, thinking I'm supposed to disagree with this guy. But at the end of that 90 minutes, I came to the realization he made a lot more sense. Now, I'm not Jewish, but I thought certainly the rabbis got this, right? If he's going to go out, he's going to defend the Abrahamic God. I mean, certainly he'll come out better. But it was Hitch who made the most sense. And it just lit a fire in me. I think also, given my temperament, the more people told me I'm not allowed to ask these questions, or I'm not allowed to come back with the wrong answer, there's kind of a rigged game. Test God. Have him reveal himself to you, drop to your knees in prayer. Okay, fine. If I do that and I come back with an answer that's anything but Jesus is real, I'm the problem. I did it wrong. The agent of evil is whispering in my ear. It's a midlife crisis. It's whatever, right? And I just got fed up. Why in the world am I so scared? And I felt compelled. I felt compelled to keep asking. And the more questions I asked, the more questions I ended up coming up with. The more I engaged apologists who were supposed to know all this stuff, the more I realized this isn't adding up. And the more dissatisfied I was, I went back to Genesis 1:1, reread the whole Bible, not as a love letter, not as a cherry-picked thing, but I read the whole thing with a little more objectivity. I mean, it was just, I couldn't not do it, if that makes any sense. I couldn't stop myself, knowing I may lose my family. My marriage was already on the rocks. My Christian employers might find a reason to fire me. I may not even know some of the consequences that are going to happen to me if I continue, but I couldn't stop. It was just this weird compulsion. I think probably a lot of people can relate to that. I see this could get nasty, but I got to keep going. And at the end of my journey, I just realized, no, I just don't buy it anymore. So
you mentioned that thousands of little things started nudging you. You had a couple of pretty big events where you're like really kind of started making you question. What pushes you from just that kind of personal satisfaction of understanding and coming to your own belief? What pushes you into, okay, I need to share this with other people? I need, what pushes you into that activism?
I've always been on the front lines. When I was a kid, I was a student council leader. I was a spokesperson for Youth for Christ. I was on stages as a Christian radio host. I have always sort of been that guy. I just want to get in the mix. And when I finally realized, I used the word atheist in regard to myself for the first time in 2008. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My whole family's evangelical. All my friends are Christians. Their basic conversations talking about church and mission trips, and they pray before their meals. And, there's such a religious culture that it had an isolating effect. I couldn't help but feel the outsideness. Plus, many of them were sort of pawing at me, that poor Seth, he's going through something and he doesn't realize that Jesus loves him so much. We must pray for him. That kind of nauseatingly condescending thing that a lot of people do. And I felt very much alone. I felt it wasn't just that I wanted to be a part of these conversations, which I did. It was a huge driving force. When I started the YouTube channel, I wanted to get into the mix, maybe help other people who might be going through the same journey. But I also started the website and online community because I felt like I'd lost the community I had. Or, at least emotionally, they'd become to disconnect a little bit. You could feel they were still your friends, they were still your family, but it felt different. It felt like they had sort of put a regulator on their hearts, and I became kind of a pet project. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I had a tribe. And so starting activism was kind of a 1-2 punch. It was a chance to be a part of the conversation, but it was also an opportunity to perhaps connect with my fellow human beings who could be part of my tribe. And maybe that community might create tribal family community bonds for other people who felt ostracized and isolated in their own circles. And it's become that, and it makes me very happy that it has.
Were there times when you thought maybe you made the wrong choice, even you realized that this wasn't true, but maybe you made the wrong choice in abandoning it? Maybe the price was too high. What was that struggle like for you?
No, I didn't feel. I understand, and I didn't at the time because I was really sort of ramped up, and I was still in that moment where I thought, if only I bring data points to these religious people, if only I show them what I have discovered. If only they see the evidence for this, and this, then they will slough off all of their chains, and we will all lock arms, and there will be confetti and Yanni music, and we will all frolic off into Reasonville to live together. And that just never happened, right? Just never happened. And I didn't realize at the time that, there are other factors going on, and data occasionally can change minds, but usually not, especially when someone has married themselves emotionally to a belief, But I myself, I'm just a freaking, I don't like to be told what to think. I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like to be told no. And instead of thinking, wow, I wish I could go back to religion, in my mind, I became more and more resentful of the people who were deeply religious, who didn't understand or support me. who I knew they were sort of talking about me, and they were having little prayer meetings about me. And I mean, I know at the water cooler or whatever, I'm sure I was part of a great many conversations in my circle, and not in a positive way. They weren't supporting me for who I was. We had some nasty conversations. My parents and I totally ostracized. I don't know how many arguments and emails and texts and phone calls, and I cut them off for a series of years because I just thought, they would not stop proselytizing and preaching and treating me like the prodigal. I must be fixed. I'm embarrassing the family. Yeah. After a while, I just couldn't. And so more than making me wish I'd gone back, although I do understand how that happens, in my own life, it actually fortified me to continue forward and slice out my own path on my terms and screw anybody who tells me I can't. But that's just my temperament. I totally do understand how those who have lost a whole support network, their community, they miss the communal music. They miss the groups that help them with divorce recovery or addiction recovery or watch their children, with childcare. And they had activities together and potlucks. And these were their friends who visited them in the hospital when they had a bad day. I mean, say what you will about religion, but the church has wonderful social structure, wonderful community structure. They're amazing at it. And there's so much goodness in that.
Do you think that it's a good thing, that religion is a good thing, or do you think it, maybe just with some tweaks, but keep kind of the community-based aspect of it, but maybe inject the truth? How do you think we address that to keep people connected, which I think is important, yet get the truth in there so that people are thinking more rationally and shying away from belief for belief's sake?
I think I hear two questions. The first is, does religion bring benefit to the world? Well, I think we can look back and see how and why religions have become so intertwined in the human experience. And, I think all we have to do is look at our history as evolved primates to understand how religions came to be and why they're so attractive. I was talking to a psychiatrist, author, and activist, Dr. Andy Thompson, and he was addressing how religions actually allowed us to have social groups, pro-social communities beyond our kin. So where before it was, our direct descendants, our relatives, that was our tribe. But if you have a religion, a set of shared beliefs and values, a common deity, etc., rituals, these things are all bonding agents. And that allows us to have an even larger tribe, an even stronger tribe. And it has a lot of utility. It can give us a sense of security and comfort and purpose. It might alleviate the fear of death. Maybe it feeds the ego. We feel like we're superior while they're inferior. There's so many reasons it's attractive. I just don't think we can escape the question, is it true? Is there any good reason to believe it? I look at Christianity. I know amazing Christians. I'm surrounded by them. Doesn't change the fact that the Bible has some very, very, very bad things in it. I'm appreciative of churches evolving away from fundamentalism more and more. We're seeing the churches that they want nothing to do with LGBT bigotry. They reject slavery and the beating of slaves and the stoning of disobedient children. And they've carved out the idea of hell. My God would never make a hell. My God loves everybody. And they sort of fashioned, custom fitted their own religion, right? I appreciate that. My beef really isn't with the more moderate religious institutions who love everybody and share my values as a humanist. My beef really is with these sort of fundy types, the literalist types, the hell theology and the young earth creationism and the anti-science propaganda and this idea that you objectify the world and go out and try to make them think like you. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. That's my beef. Somebody who was indoctrinated as a young child to believe in untrue things, to distrust science and the evidence, and to fear hell. I think that's a form of abuse. I stand against it. And it's one of the reasons that I fight. A big challenge that we do have, though, is religion has had thousands and thousands of years to develop its community models. We in the free thought community, we're like herding cats anyway. I think we're pretty new to this game as far as organizing at this level. We have a long way to go. There are some groups who are filling in the blank. I talk about Oasis and a lot of these free thought and humanist groups. They do what they can, but I think, we have we need to evolve ourselves quite a bit to begin to create these moments of human connection, shared values, sharing life together. And I grow frustrated because there's a little bit of an aversion to it by some who seem to think it's church, like gatherings church, communities church, conventions church. That's just stupid. It's wrong. It's bogus. You've just surrendered ground to the church that belongs to human beings. I like a lot of the more secular, humanistic, non-theistic religious models. Half of practicing Jews express doubts or outright disbelief in God. I think those people practicing a traditional Judaism, good for them. Love the Unitarians, even though they kind of frustrate me because their tent is so open, they'll give voice to any idea, but at least they're accepting. They're not a judgmental environment. But I also think we need to realize if we're going to ask people to walk away from some of these communities, we got to have a net for them to land in. And that's the work we're going to have to do on our end first.
You had talked about anger and that you had some anger when you left. And I was hoping you could expand on that. Who did you blame? How did that evolve?
Anger is justifiable. I'm angry that I wasted so much of my life mocking science and scientists and not truly understanding the world. I'm angry that I was taught to discriminate against people, to be a bigot against people, I was angry that so much time and so many resources were wasted. And I was angry that I was being pawed at and condescended to by people who essentially believed in magic. Talking donkeys in the book of Genesis and people living inside the bellies of fish and 900-year-old human beings and supermen who gain power based on hair length and, a super baby who impregnates an unwed teenager with himself so he can grow up to be pinned to a few pieces of wood to save us from the hell he created, blah, blah, blah. I'm over here going, I have a reasonable gripe.
When you put it that way, it almost sounds like it's not true, but please continue.
When you realize that the people who hold these outlandish beliefs and cannot in any way prove them, and they are treating you like the broken thing, yeah, I was angry. And I'm angry still. The difference is I think I needed some time to find balance, to find a sense of equilibrium, because I was so angry in that moment. I felt like I'd been lied to, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't angry at my mother and father for teaching me that the Bible was true, okay? Or for lying to me, because they weren't lying. They believed it. They felt they were being good parents. They were training up a child in the way that he should go. So there was no malice. They weren't trying to deceive me. And so I wasn't angry for that. I was angry because afterwards they were judging and condescending and essentially pawing and preaching to the point where I had to cut them off for a while. I was angry. I'm angry now. I get angry at the Christian nationalists who are trying to turn the whole damn country into a freaking Christian church. I'm angry when people go after 4-year-olds and teach them to be afraid of hell. But it's, for me, has become more of a balancing act where I do have my moments of real anger, but I don't want to spend all my life burning the fuse of anger at both ends. Life is short and precious. I don't want to sit around and rage all freaking day. It's damaging. It starts to turn your heart to stone. I'm doing a speech this summer about how, especially with COVID and online tribes and tribalism can be wonderful and terrible, and how we have become more and more isolated. Everybody's shouting and memeing and lashing out and typing in all caps and arguing, blah, blah, blah. After a while, you just start to turn to stone. And I just didn't want that for myself. So finally, I began to find more balance. I found more charity within myself. My anger began to wane just enough where, even though I do have moments of real indignation, I think I have more understanding. I'm less prone to knee jerk. I'm not shouting as much. And I'm trying to understand how ideas are formed and how minds are changed based on psychology, rather than simply dragging my book of bullet points into a room and saying, here, I've got the data. Now I realize that that hardly ever works.
It sounds to me like you've grown up. Do you ever look back at your early adult life and think less of yourself for being a fully believing Christian? I hate to say, did you think you were a bad person? I guess.
Oh, I'll ask that. Did you think you were a bad person, Seth? Did that thought ever cross your mind for just believing this? Sorry.
No, I get where he's going. I think I don't think of it in terms of good and bad or better or worse. I wasn't less intelligent when I was a believer. Some people are like, religious people are stupid. I used to hear a lot of this sort of condescension from superior atheists who talk about the mentally ill, religious people, which is a terrible argument. It's just not even remotely rooted to the truth. I, more than anything, am struck by the power of indoctrination, the power of cultural reinforcement. All of these mechanisms in place to sort of keep me in the faith. But am I a better person today? Yeah. I mean, once you leave the religious culture, once you're not looking at everything with your God glasses, and this speaks to values, because once I realized I didn't believe in a God, then I had to go back to all the major parts of my life, all my values, how I saw the world, and say, okay, well, now I'm not filtering this through the Bible or a sermon or indoctrination. How do I really feel about it? So I had to go back point by point. All right, how do I feel about gay marriage? Well, that's changed. How do I feel about the other nations of the world? I used to think that we're a Christian nation, God ordained, we're superior, and then after that, well, I was able to see the world in a more egalitarian way as part of the human condition. How do I feel about things like right to die issues and the death penalty and the legalization of drugs, foreign policy and healthcare and all these other things? I ended up evolving my positions on so many other things. I became more empathetic. Back in the day, I used to look at things like anorexia, and in my binary, uber simplistic religious way of thinking, I thought, well, this is just a sin or weakness. Yeah, if you're hungry, eat something, right? This is just terrible thinking. I had no idea what sort of precursors took place in someone's life to cause them to become anorexic. Where was my empathy? Where was my compassion? Why was I so averse to understanding the psychology behind these behaviors, the damage done? Why wasn't I willing to be part of their solution instead of sort of throwing stones from the cheap seats? In so many areas, I do feel like I've become more enlightened, certainly with so much to learn, but I feel like my ideas have certainly evolved. I was a good guy back then. I'm still the same guy, but I'd like to think that now, at least I've, to use your words, grown up just a little bit more.
All right, I have two questions. You have a call-in show, and I'm sure you get some interesting calls, and you also have access to resources if somebody calls in. But if somebody calls in and says, "Seth, I'm someone who's just going through this process now, and I realize I don't have any faith anymore, and I don't feel tethered to anyone. I've seen so many anti-theists who I never liked, and I don't like, and I've been told so many things from people that I don't believe anymore. I don't even know who I am. How do I figure that out? What do I do now?" What would you say to them?
Well, I think I can't tell anybody who they are. I don't think anybody wants that. I, as an encourager, though, do tell them nobody else can define you. No one else gets to determine what your values are, who you love, what you want to accomplish in your life. The signature review is something that you must write yourself. And that's the first thing I tell them, because, a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission, we hear this in the way parents talk to their children. They'll say, well, that's not how we raised you. We didn't raise you to be this, which is a stamp of them upon me. It robs me of my individuality. Parent ought to be saying, discover who you are. We'll give you some of the basics. We'll help tool you up for life, but stay curious. Figure out what you want. What are your hopes and desires and values and dreams, etc.? And if you learn something new, come to us and teach us. Maybe we can all learn something together. That's the way to do it. But it's so often not what happens. And we tend to think, well, I'm going to let my parents down if I leave church, or if I, marry this person, or if I take this job, or if I move to this area, or if I don't live in a way that they approve of. And I'm always telling people, you don't need their approval. I know it's going to suck. It's going to be hard. I know that they may emotionally or even financially blackmail you. The thing to remember is that's their fault. It's not yours. They're the ones putting these conditions in place. They're the ones forcing your hands. And it's not your fault that it's happening. And then I usually refer them to recoveringfromreligion.org, which is an organization that isn't sitting around trying to deconvert people. Mostly they're just trying to listen. You can call or you can chat online, even anonymously, and a lot of these people can reach out and just have a listening ear and be reminded it's okay. Take the journey, take your time, breathe. There's no clock on this. As long as your journey belongs to you and you are giving yourself permission to ask these questions and to not take anybody else's word for it, that's the most important thing. And wherever you land, just get there on your own terms. And I think that's the encouragement. That's the angle I take with people who call.
I remember hearing so many times from my father, and I was just dismissive, but he'd say all the time, you can be anything you want to be. And I remember just saying, okay, Dad, sure, whatever. All the way until one of the scariest days of my life when I realized he was right. Is Andrew, what's the next question?
One of the things that you had mentioned was you had to kind of go back and look through your life and your values and how you saw the world. And instead of filtering it through this rather simplistic black and white type of prism, kind of realizing that it isn't quite so simple. And I think that you get really enticed. People get enticed into a very overly simplistic view. They find a kind of a tribe. It's like, okay, we have this kind of view, and they make everything super simple. And then I come along and I say, okay, but I'm not in that tribe, and ergo I must be bad, ergo I must be a Nazi. And I'm wondering if you've seen that kind of same thing where people tend to oversimplify, and when you try and get into more nuance, people resist it because it's not simple. I kind of view it as maybe growing up and realizing that the world isn't the way you think it is, and it's vastly more complicated, and maybe you should give them clarity. Do you have do you think that that's a problem that we're running into?
I think it's a problem across the human spectrum. The internet has not helped. People want it to fit on a meme or in a 28-character Twitter post. They're frustrated by complexity. And so, we want the quick fix. I think this is a human tendency that continues to be a problem more and more as the internet has put us in these information silos where we are reinforced and the algorithms kick in, and then we manage to boot out anybody who is different than us. I see it on the right, I see it on the left, I see it among religious groups, I see it in atheist and religious people, and you'll just find any tribe can be guilty of that. I don't think necessarily they all do it equivalently. I think this is a complex world, but it's definitely a problem. And I think the first step is to be aware of it and to try to rehumanize each other. Leaning back into the speech I'm giving this summer, it's really about remembering, I'm not dealing with a two-dimensional avatar when I engage somebody on the internet. It's a flesh and blood person. Have I stopped to think, well, what are they saying? What is their attitude? Since I can't hear their tone of voice and see their eyes and expressions, am I assuming that they're bad faith agents? Are they trolls? Are they terrible people? Do they just disagree? Maybe they have a horrible idea, but they genuinely believe they're the hero in the story. And how do I effectively and constructively engage? How do we rehumanize each other? Whenever possible, I think there's some people that have to be nuked from orbit out there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit around and play nice and sing Kumbaya with, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ben Shapiro and those types. But,
I'll remember to look up.
The everyday people. I just think we probably can all do better. And this tribalism, this sort of binary thinking, I want it all to be quick and easy, A, B, yes, no, black, white, good, evil. This is something that's, man, we sure want, just not the world we live in.
So I'm prepared to ask my last question that's going to wrap it up. Is Andrew, did you want to ask anything else before that?
So in other words, you want the last word, and if I have any other question, I should ask it now.
But well, you can ask. It's not going to end up in the show. I'm going to cut it when we do the editing for this. But I wanted to be polite and pretend like I care about your opinion. That's the kind of host I am, is Andrew. I want you to think I'm a good guy while I'm stabbing you in the back.
I think I actually asked you a very similar question to that the last time you were on here when we were talking about improving communications between people or improving discourse between people.
Well, it's relevant. I think a lot of us are, we feel this sense of growing isolation. And I'm not convinced we're going to change the world by blitzkrieging everybody who we consider to be in opposition, even those who are literally in opposition. And they're a problem. Well, am I in the business of trying to change minds to try to create the world I want to live in, this better world? Or do I think I'm just going to sit around and throw memes at them and, jabs on Twitter, and then in my Slacktivism tell myself that I've made any sort of substantive difference? I would rather build a bridge than burn one. I'd rather make an ally instead of declaring an enemy. I whenever possible. And I think that starts with consideration and humanity and nuance and thoughtfulness and just taking a breath instead of flying off the handle and saying, well, it's all this or all that. I just don't think it works like that.
Yeah, and we need more people like you in the world to preach that. To preach that message.
That's scary.
Not necessarily just like you, but people willing to go out and kind of preach that message. I mean, thinking is hard. Trying to come up with rational reasons for the things that you believe is hard. I mean,
even harder than that, I think, is sharing the room with somebody who holds a different position. Now, I'm not saying, again, that we need to hold hands and even share oxygen with truly awful people. But I also think we have demonized many people who hold an opposing point of view, who just might not be Hitler, and maybe sharing that space provides an opportunity where conversations can begin.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to see more conversations, especially like this one. It's been great. Thank you for coming on.
Oh yeah, thank you.
All right, so Hitchens meant a lot to a lot of us. He had done a famous documentary with Douglas Wilson, and it was called Collision. And in that, it was a series of debates that were recorded and discussed. But in the end of that documentary, Douglas Wilson asked Hitchens a question, and I was shocked by the answer, and I think most people were. Douglas Wilson asked, if you could eliminate all religion tomorrow, would you? And Hitchens said no. Seth Andrews, if I gave you the glove of Thanos and you could snap religion away, would you?
No. I would, and let me qualify that, because not all religions are supernaturally based religions. There are non-theistic religions. Talk about community and ritual and structure, which are wonderful parts of the human experience. You can have a non-theistic, you can have a secular religion. That's another point I've sort of evolved on over the last dozen years. But if I could snap my fingers, I think what I would do is promote the confidence of curiosity and encourage people not to take authority's word for it. Many of the high control religions are really authoritarian. You've got the God, and you've got the Father, who is over Christ, who is over the Holy Spirit, is over the rest of us. You've got the husband who is over the wife, who's the head of the family. You've got the pastor who is the head of his flock, leading the shepherd, leading his flock, blah, blah, blah. And we tend to trust authority with a capital A. If I could snap the finger of Thanos, it would be, don't take anybody's word for it. Do your own thinking. Find out what the experts say, and then find out what the criticisms are of those experts, and continue to, in that, I think it was in that same documentary Collision, where they were talking about how an open mind is meant to close on something. And what they mean by that, and I agree, is there does come a point when you can assemble enough information where, you can say, okay, look, I think this is supported, overwhelmingly supported, and I now embrace this idea, but it's not welded shut. Because if tomorrow better evidence came along, you could pop it back open and then readjust your position. I think being genuinely curious, making every day a discovery, that's the key. So whether or not you're religious or not religious, etc., if you're genuinely curious and interested in living an honest and truthful life and making every day a discovery based in truth and honesty, that's what I would wish for everyone in the world, on the earth, and in every culture, in every nation, for sure.
Seth Andrews, thank you so much for joining us. It was a delightful conversation, as always. We're really glad to have you back. Now, for those of you who know who he is, I don't need to tell you, go check out his material. It's delightful. Even if you're not an atheist or an anti-theist, I hope you can see why he's worth listening to and engaging in. So you can find him on Twitter. We'll have the description, his links all in the description below. thethinkingatheist.com, sethandrews.com. Absolutely worth going to, and I hope by now you see why, and you see why we're so pleased to have had him. So Seth Andrews, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Zandering. Yeah, thanks for coming. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the mods, to everyone who's helped with this show, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Good night.